All right, buckle up, because this deep dive is a doozy. We're diving headfirst into Waco, 1993. You know, that whole siege thing. You sent over a mountain of stuff, articles, reports, even personal stories. It's clear you want to go deeper than just the headlines, right?
Absolutely. This isn't just some history lesson. This
No.
is about how narratives get twisted, how faith and fear can collide. It's about what happens when the lines get blurry,
It's like everyone's heard of Waco, but figuring out what really happened? That's the real puzzle. So let's start with the Branch Davidians. The media slapped that cult label on them faster than you could say David Koresh.
Yeah.
But if we peel back that label for a second, what's actually underneath?
Well, Koresh himself was a fascinating figure. I mean, he wasn't just some random guy with a megaphone, right? He pulled from Seventh-day Adventist beliefs, threw in prophecies, even a little bit of rock and roll.
Hold on, rock and roll. That's not exactly what comes to mind when you think cult leader.
Right. It's an interesting twist. Koresh was a musician, played guitar, had a band. This wasn't just about fire and brimstone sermons. He incorporated music, had this magnetic energy, drew people in. Some argue that actually made him more appealing, especially to people looking for something to believe in.
It's amazing how our perception of something can be so off. And he wove this whole rock star persona into his teachings, even claiming he was the last prophet, right?
Exactly. He wasn't just interpreting scripture, he was placing himself right in the middle of it. And the core message, it wasn't about peace and love, that's for sure. It was about facing down Babylon, the symbol of the corrupt outside world, ultimately battling it out in some apocalyptic showdown. Intense stuff.
Okay, so we've got prophecy, rock and roll, a dash of good versus evil. But this wasn't just some theoretical debate club, right? These beliefs form the foundation of their entire community out there at Mount Carmel.
Exactly. Families, kids, a structured life, all built around Koresh's teachings. And yeah, we can't avoid the elephant in the room. The spiritual wives. Koresh fathered children with multiple women within the group, a practice that raised eyebrows even back then.
Yeah, and there were those allegations of child abuse within the compound. Definitely something we can't ignore. But here's what gets me. These folks weren't living on some remote island. This was Waco, Texas. What was their relationship like with the outside world?
That's what makes it so interesting. They weren't completely isolated. Before everything went haywire, the local newspaper, the Waco Tribune-Herald, even ran some surprisingly balanced, even positive stories about them.
Really? Like what?
Well, there was a piece about their kindergarten. It wasn't some hidden dungeon. It was a structured learning environment. They saw themselves as providing for their kids, even if it was different from the norm.
That's definitely different from the whole brainwashed cult narrative.
It is. But then, the Waco Tribune-Herald also published that Sinful Messiah series, and that changed everything.
Ah, yes, Sinful Messiah. That's been pointed to as a turning point in how the public saw them.
Exactly. Suddenly, they went from a group with unconventional beliefs to public enemy number one. It's wild how a single story, even if it's well-researched, can completely flip the script on public opinion.
And to be fair, Sinful Messiah did bring to light some seriously disturbing allegations about Koresh. But it's important to remember, even with all that, most scholars don't see the Branch Davidians as a classic cult. They were a group with a unique, albeit controversial, theology and way of life. But cult, that word comes with a lot of baggage.
It does. And in this case, that label might have stopped people from seeing the nuances of who the Branch Davidians really were, what they believed, and how they saw themselves.
So we've got this picture of the Branch Davidians, their beliefs, their life out at Mount Carmel, even their interactions with the Waco community. But then February 28th, 1993 happens, the ATF raid. You'd think textbook law enforcement operation, right? Not exactly. What went down that day was a textbook example of how not to handle a situation.
No kidding. The ATF, they planned this whole dynamic entry, which in plain English means a high-speed, no-holds-barred assault meant to completely overwhelm whoever they're targeting. The only problem was it didn't go quite according to plan.
That's putting it mildly. I mean, you look at the intel they had, it's almost laughable.
Yeah.
They were convinced these guys were running a massive meth lab, like something out of Breaking Bad, and that this justified a full-on military operation. Talk about overkill.
Yeah, except the whole meth lab thing turned out to be a big fat bust. Later investigations really cast doubt on that claim. Many believe the ATF used it as an excuse to bring in the big guns, literally. They even got the military involved, which is practically unheard of for a domestic operation.
Okay, so we've got misinformation, an exaggerated sense of danger, and enough firepower to invade a small island. No wonder things went off the rails. But it gets weirder when you bring the media into the mix. Apparently, the ATF was pretty nervous about that Sinful Messiah series in the Waco Tribune-Herald. They actually tried to get the paper to postpone running it.
Can you imagine the ATF trying to muscle a newspaper into burying a story? But here's the kicker. The Tribune-Herald published the Sinful Messiah series anyway, and guess what happened the very next day?
The raid.
You got it. The ATF, feeling the heat from the series and already under scrutiny, decided to just go for it.
So we're talking a botched raid, faulty intelligence, and the media frenzy just adding fuel to the fire. But there's one more thing that doesn't quite add up. Those 50 caliber machine guns the ATF was so worried about, turns out they were mostly regular firearms, practically pea shooters compared to what the ATF brought in.
Exactly. It's almost funny, if it wasn't so tragic, they hyped up the danger, maybe to justify their own actions, and ended up creating the very scenario they were trying to avoid.
So the raid was a disaster, driven by bad intel and a desire to flex their muscles. And the really tragic part is, it was only the beginning. Now the FBI gets called in, facing a 51-day standoff with a group that genuinely believed they were living out a biblical prophecy.
And not just any prophecy, we're talking about facing down the forces of evil in a final showdown. Talk about a pressure cooker.
This was a whole different ballgame. We aren't talking about negotiating with some bank robbers. This was the FBI dealing with a group who truly believed they were in the middle of a biblical apocalypse. Talk about a tough situation.
And here's the thing. The FBI was walking into something they didn't fully grasp. Remember those forces of Babylon Koresh kept mentioning? Well, to the Branch Davidians, the FBI were Babylon. They weren't just negotiators, they were the bad guys, literally playing a part in this doomsday prophecy.
Talk about impossible expectations, right? So how do you even begin to de-escalate something like that?
Honestly, they tried everything. They brought in negotiators, behavioral experts, even religious scholars to try to make sense of Koresh's teachings to find some common ground. But at the same time, they also tried some, let's say, unconventional tactics.
Yeah, like that whole blast them with music and bright lights strategy.
Right.
It's like they got their playbook from a bad 80s action movie.
Yeah.
But seriously, what were they hoping to achieve with that?
It's easy to judge looking back, but remember, they were dealing with a group that had already shown they were willing to die for their beliefs. Maybe the FBI thought that by turning up the pressure, making things uncomfortable, they could break their will, make them surrender.
So they were playing on those apocalyptic fears, maybe even trying to nudge them toward fulfilling their own prophecy. But on the FBI's terms, that's pretty messed up.
Yeah, it's a disturbing thought. And one of the most unsettling examples of this was that whole Fifth Seal episode. The FBI, they had been poring over the book of Revelation, trying to understand Koresh's obsession with it. They got fixated on the Fifth Seal, that part about martyrs being given white robes.
Okay, but how do you go from reading a Bible verse to using it as some kind of tactic?
Well, they decided to put on this bizarre performance. They sent a message into the compound about how Koresh's followers, the true believers, would receive white robes. They even went so far as to drape white sheets over some tanks. It was this surreal attempt to speak Koresh's language, to manipulate him using his own beliefs.
Like a twisted game of religious charades or something? Did it work?
Nope. If anything, it probably just reinforced their convictions. You see, to the Branch Davidians, any attempt by the FBI to engage with their beliefs just proved they were in a biblical showdown. They were already in too deep.
Which leads us to the tragic ending we all knew was coming. April 19th, 1993. The fire. The official story is that the Branch Davidians started it, a mass suicide. But that never sat right with me.
You're not the only one. The official narrative has been questioned a lot. There are just too many unanswered questions. I mean, for one, the fire started in multiple places at almost the same time, right after the FBI started pumping tear gas into the compound.
The FBI insisted it wasn't an assault, though, right? Just trying to flush them out with tear gas.
That's their version. But you've got eyewitness accounts, people like David Thibodeau, one of the survivors, who said the Branch Davidians didn't start the fire. He claims the FBI is responsible, that their actions directly caused the tragedy.
And then there's the whole missing evidence thing. Seriously, a key piece of evidence. A door with bullet holes that might show who fired first during the raid goes missing. It looks really suspicious, like they're trying to cover something up.
And the FBI's explanations for that missing door haven't exactly been convincing. Then there's the fact they initially said they had audio of Koresh telling his followers to start the fire, but later they took it back, said they didn't have that evidence after all.
Wait, didn't they have the whole place bugged? Weren't they listening in on everything?
Exactly. Which makes you wonder, what are they telling us? What's on those tapes that they're so afraid of getting out? No wonder people cry foul.
So we've got conflicting accounts, missing evidence, and an official story that seems about as solid as a wet paper bag. What does it all mean?
To be honest, there's no easy answer. Waco isn't a puzzle with a neat solution. It's a tangled mess of beliefs, mistakes, and a whole lot of tragedy. It forces us to ask some hard questions. What happens when a group's beliefs are so different, so outside the mainstream, that the line between religious freedom and public safety gets blurred?
And can we really say, looking back, that the FBI acted with restraint? That they truly considered every other option before using force? Tough questions with no easy answers. This deep dive has been eye-opening, that's for sure.
It really makes you think.
It reminds us that sometimes the most crucial thing isn't finding the answers, but asking the right questions. Thanks for joining us on this journey, folks. We'll leave you to ponder the rest.